What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Warden tank. So the Warden tank is still quite a powerful tank spec. It's widely regarded to be one of the better classes when it comes to just pure tanking potential here. Pretty much only outmatched by the Dragon Knight tank, and the main reason for this is the fact that Wardens do have a class unique buff under minor toughness. Now while the buff is arguably easier to apply as a Warden healer since it procs off of healing, it is also relatively easy to apply as a tank. In addition, the sort of class abilities that Wardens have at their disposal are also very well geared towards tanking, having some nice sources of major maim and minor protection that are kind of missing from the Dragon Knight. That being said, Dragon Knights are still considered the top tanks, mainly because of minor brutality from their class buff, as well as engulfing flames, but make no mistakes, Wardens are a pretty strong tanking class, mainly filling in the role as an off tank, with the Dragon Knight being the main tank. So, just like the rest of our build videos, we're going over skills, gear, attributes, everything you basically need to know to recreate this build yourself. Now, as a support role, you will need to have a lot of different sets and have a lot of different abilities on the hand to kind of swap out depending on the fight, then depending on your role. So we'll be going over a lot of different sets. We'll be discussing when and where you would use them, why you would use them, as well as the same thing with abilities. And then from there, because we are support roles and obviously support roles don't have a DPS parse, we'll be talking instead about how I like to approach tanking and kind of the idea and the philosophies behind tanking in Elder Scrolls Online. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here first with our gear. So again, this is just one of many different gear combinations that you're going to want to have on hand. There's a lot of different combinations out there. But this is one of the ones that I like to turn to kind of as sort of a default set. Starting off with the Monster Helm, we're going with Lord Warden. This comes from Imperial City Prison, so you do need to have access to the Imperial City DLC in order to grab this set. Pretty standard tanking set here. It's both selfish and group oriented at the same time. So we are a support role, so we kind of want to focus in on group oriented sets here, and Lord Warden fits that build really nicely. So it basically gives some additional physical and spell resistance to anybody within 8 meters of you, and this does stack on top of Major Ward and Minor Ward and Resolve as well. In addition, the one piece adds almost 3,000 spell and physical resistance for yourself, so it does give you a lot of additional resistances, particularly useful if you are not a Nord. There are some other Monster Helm sets, but we'll go over those in a few minutes. For our body set, we're going with Perfected Yolnahkriin. This comes from the new Trial Sunspire from Elsweyr. The Perfected version comes from finishing the trial on Veteran difficulty, so it doesn't have to be hard mode, it just has to be Veteran. The non-perfect version, so just plain Yolnahkriin, that comes from clearing Sunspire on a normal. Now, perfected and imperfect Yolnahkriin, the difference is that max health bonus on that 5-piece. So there's really not too much difference between running the perfect version or the imperfect version. So you're perfectly fine farming normal Sunspire for the imperfect version of Yolnahkriin. Losing that max health is not that big of a deal. You can usually adjust for it by, for example, putting a couple more points into the health attributes, or maybe running a health glyph rather than a prismatic glyph on one of your large pieces. So if you can't finish Vet Sunspire, you can farm the non-perfect version from normal Sunspire instead. For our front bar set, we're going with Alkosh, still one of the strongest debuff sets in the game for tanks to run, and one of the strongest DPS support sets. So the special 5-piece effect, when you activate a synergy, you reduce the physical and spell resistance of any enemy hit by 3010 at gold, all gold rarity for 10 seconds. So this does stack on top of a lot of other debuffs, so the Crusher Enchant, Major and Minor Breach, and Major and Minor Fracture. So very, very powerful debuff here, one of the strongest in the game when it comes to resistance debuffs. So very strong to have on a tank, mainly because tanks are going to be in the best position to get those synergies. For weapons, front bar we have the standard sword and board. In the back bar you have a few options here. I personally like the ice staff the best, but you can also go with the lightning staff or a bow back bar as well. Now talking about enchants and traits before we move on to discussing other sets. So for the back bar, regardless of whether that's an ice staff, a lightning staff, or a bow, you have a few options here. So the most common option that you're going to be seeing is going to be infused with a Crusher Enchant. Ice staff, lightning staff allows you to use Blockade, which helps proc the Crusher Enchant on the closest enemy to you, and Endless Hail for a bow back bar. It'll also proc Crusher, this time centered around whatever enemy happens to be closest to the center of the Endless Hail cast. So pretty much the only way to get the full Crusher Enchant strength, if you decide to run Crusher on the front bar instead, on the one-handed shield bar, you only have half of the strength of the Crusher Enchant, so it'd be 1054 rather than 2108 that we see here. So that's really important to have the Crusher on the back bar. Now, sometimes Crusher has been moved over to the healer in some groups, so if the Crusher Enchant has moved over to the healer, then you can run a different enchant here, maybe something like Absorb Stamina to help out your stamina sustain, or you can run something like Shock Enchant to help out with Concussed uptimes, which helps out with off-balance uptime. So those are kind of your options there for back bar enchants. Now for your front bar, we're going with a Decisive as your trait. There aren't many good traits because we are going to be running poisons most likely, so either Fracturing Poisons like I have here, or Breaching Poisons for the Minor Breach. Depends on kind of the makeup of your DPS, whether you have a lot of stamina or a lot of magicka. Of course, you can still run enchants. You can run something like Absorb Health or Absorb Stamina or even Absorb Magicka enchants if you would like. In that instance, you might want to run Infused just to get more enchant procs going. But the other traits are pretty weak overall for the one-handed sword. So I like Decisive just because it's probably the best trait out of all different traits in the game. But you can go Infused if you're running an enchant, or you can do something like Defensive if you want some more resistances, if you're not a Nord, for example. So a couple of options there. For shield, I like to go with Sturdy for the Prismatic enchant. Sturdy to help our stamina sustain by reducing the cost of block here. For our jewelry, you have a few options when it comes to traits and enchants. So starting off with enchants, the main enchant you're going to be seeing is going to be the Glyph of Shielding or the Shield Plate enchant. This just reduces the cost of block. So basically, gives you better stamina sustain because you will be blocking obviously quite a lot as a tank. Two other enchant options that I have seen floated around. First one's going to be Magicka Regen Glyphs. So this just helps let your Magicka regen. Quite important as a tank because pretty much all of our buffs are more or less using Magicka. So you do want to have high Magicka recovery so that way you're able to use these buffs very regularly. Now that being said, a lot of tanks now are using balance in order to get your Magicka sustain going, so it's not necessarily necessary to run Magicka regen glyphs. The other enchant that I've seen is the potion cooldown glyph. So these reduce your potion cooldown timer by 5 seconds, so instead of 45 seconds it goes to 40 seconds if you have one enchant, and so on. I see this most commonly used with Argonians because Argonians do have a racial passive that gives them some additional resources back whenever they drink a potion. So this basically gives you better sustain by allowing you to drink your tri-potions more often. That being said, because you're drinking more potions in a given amount of time, it also ends up being very expensive to maintain. So just keep that in mind if you decide to go with potion cooldown glyphs. For traits, I personally like to go with this particular combination, which is 2 Triune and 1 Harmony. I like Harmony because it does give me some more resources back when I get a shard, helps me get some more healing done if I need to proc a Blood Altar synergy. Overall, fairly useful to have, but not really particularly strong overall. It's one of those, like, if you have nothing else, it's better than nothing. But in terms of traits, you have a lot of different enchants, trait options. So Triune is basically just like a triglyph, so you have all resources that way. Healthy gives you health, Arcane gives you magicka, Robust gives you stamina, so you can play around with your resource pools that way. You can also go with Swift for the increased movement speed, which is helpful in a lot of different trials. You can also go with Infused to improve the enchant strength. So quite a few options when it comes to jewelry traits. So play around with what you want on your tank. For our armor pieces, I personally like to go with Sturdy with max health enchants on my small pieces like you see here, and then I like to go Infused on my large pieces with Prismatic enchants. Most tanks will recommend going with Prismatic enchants on the large pieces here, but tanks are kind of split between whether they want to run Infused on the large pieces or Sturdy on the Infused on the large pieces or Sturdy on the small pieces. Some tanks also like to use Prismatic enchants on all armor pieces, so that way they get even more resources to play around with at the expense of some health. So you have quite a few options here. It really depends on your personal tanking style and what you want to prioritize. So for example, I know Leofa likes to go with Sturdy on all of his pieces. I'm comfortable running Infused on my large pieces here, so you have a lot of different options to kind of play around with. So just work around it, see what your tank needs, see what your tanking style is like, and what you're most comfortable with. Moving on next to a couple of gear options. So we will be going through these in relative alphabetical order here, and we're going to start off first with dungeon sets. There are a few heavy dungeon sets that you're going to want to have on hand as a tank. The first one's going to be Ebon. Classic tank set, one of the best support sets in the game for your DPS. This is found in Crypt of Hearts, so this is base game set. The 5-piece increases max health by 1,118 at full gold rarity for you and up to 11 group members within 28 meters of you. Now this max health is affected by by percentage modifiers, so things like CP, minor toughness, and the Undaunted passive. That all increases the amount of max health that you get from Ebon Armory. So it's really closer to around a 30% increase with the CP bonus and the minor toughness buff as well. So it actually ends up being closer to around 1.5k health is what you could realistically expect to get from Ebon. So it just helps with survivability, allows your DPS to spec a little bit more into damage rather than speccing into survivability, so allows them to deal a little bit more damage that way. Another heavy armor set that you might want to have on hand is going to be Leeching Plate. So this is a selfish set. So this comes from Imperial City Prison, so you do need to have access to the Imperial City DLC in order to farm for this set here. So very selfish set, so this basically deals poison, has a chance to proc whenever you take damage, and it deals poison damage to an enemy within the cloud itself, and it also heals you for that damage. So it's very, very powerful when you have a lot of trash to kind of round up, and you want to stay alive. So very useful for things like Blackroot's Prison while you're progressing and learning the fights, the stacks as a tank, because with all the ads going in, you get a lot of healing from Leeching Plate. Another set you want to have is going to be Jailer's Tenacity. This is also a more selfish set, so very nice for progression, but if you want to maximize group utility, Jailers is not particularly useful. So this comes from Moonhunter Keep, so you do need to have access to the Wolf Hunter DLC to grab this set. When you do 7,000 or more health from a single attack, you gain Major Vitality for 5 seconds. So very useful to have in those fights where you're losing 7,000 or more health from a single attack. Not many fights in the game will proc Jailers. The ones that I can think of would be Cloud Rest and potentially Sunspire on hard mode for the dragons. Major Vitality is a very, very strong healing buff. So having the Major Vitality will just allow your healers to get you up a little bit faster. So in the fights where you do have a consistent way to proc Jailers, it's actually going to be very useful. So like in Cloud Rest, this will proc off of Baneful Mark, and having that Major Vitality will definitely help your healers get you all the way back up to get rid of Baneful Mark in Execute. Moving on to a couple of medium armor dungeon sets. There are a handful of medium armor dungeon sets that you might want to have on hand. The first one is going to be pretty much only one, really, and that's going to be Hircine's Veneer. So this is usually going to be on a healer, but you might want to wear this as a tank depending on what sets that your healers are currently running. This comes from Celine's Web, so it's a base game set. It's a medium armor set, very similar to Alkosh, so you do need to have the jewelry and the weapons. Reduces the cost of stamina abilities by 4% for pretty much everybody within your group. So very nice for stamina sustain. Not very useful if you have a lot of Magicka DPS. So for example in Asylum, if you're not running bow builds. So use it if you need the sustain for stamina DPS. If you're running a lot of Magicka DPS, not particularly useful there. And then from along the same line, the dungeon set that you might want to have on hand, as you can imagine, is going to be, let's find it here real fast. So the first one is going to be Worm's Raiment, basically the Magicka version of Hircine's. Again, if you have stamina DPS, then obviously Worm is not going to be very useful. Typically it's going to be on the healer, but sometimes your healers want to wear a different set, so this will be passed on to you as a tank. Light armor set, so make sure to get the jewelry and the weapons. And the other set you might want to have on hand is going to be Sanctuary. So this comes from Banished Cells, base game set. Increases your healing received by 12% for you and up to 11 group members within 10 meters of you. A very niche set, so not many places are where you're going to find Sanctuary be very useful. The two main places I've seen it used is Cloud Rest to kind of help out in Execute for progression groups to get rid of Baneful Mark a little bit faster, and then Lakessi's hard mode in order to heal people up from the ice prisons a little bit faster as well. Now, this could be worn on a healer, it could be worn on a tank, so again, kind of play it by ear depending on your specific raid groups and what your healers are wearing. Next, going over overland sets. Starting with the heavy overland sets, there are a handful here. First one's going to be Plague Doctor, another selfish set, really great for progression, but for group utility it's pretty much useless. So it comes from Deshawn, so base game set, it just adds 4,000 max health. Crap ton of health comes from Plague Doctor this way. Next we have Akaviri Dragonguard. This reduces the cost of your ultimate abilities by 15%, so basically allows you to get more Warhorns out, which ends up giving you higher major force up times, which gives you greater DPS. So this is a kind of a group-oriented set, so pretty nice to have on hand if you really don't have any other sets to run. And then finally, Livewire is a very niche set, so when you take damage you have a chance to apply concuss to enemies within 8 meters of you and heal for a certain amount of health for each enemy you hit. So nice if you want to apply AoE concussion to enemies, which is required for off balance, but beyond that, not particularly useful. Kind of fits that same niche as Leeching Plate, where you get a lot of health back, but it does have a proc cooldown. But it also has a little bit of additional group utility by having concussed in there as well. There is one medium armor overland set that I do want to kind of bring up here, and that's going to be, if I can find it, Hide of the Werewolf. So this comes from Glenumbra, so base game set. When you take damage you generate 5 ultimate, and this can occur every 5 seconds. Just gives you some more ulti gen, so you can pump out more Warhorns that way. And then trial sets, there are pretty much no heavy armor trial sets that you want to run. The only one that you might want to consider picking up would be something like Eternal Warrior for like no death achievements, but even that's kind of, I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing that if you're not comfortable running a death preventer set for no death achievements. But there is one trial set that I do want to mention here, War Machine. So, Wardens do have a relatively cheap ultimate with Healing Thicket. That costs 90 ultimate. So, pretty cheap. There are obviously cheaper ultimates in the game, so Nightblades with Incapacitating Strike or Soul Harvest. But you could potentially run War Machine here. So this comes from Halls of Fabrication, so you do have access to Vardenfell in order to farm for this set here. And if you are running trees, this will just help give out Major Slayer to you and to allies closest to you. So this is going to be more useful in 4-man content compared to 12-man content, and even then it might be more beneficial to run Warhorn rather than War Machine and use trees. So kind of play it by ear. I would still pick it up, but I wouldn't necessarily put a priority on farming for War Machine. There are a couple of Cyrodiil sets that you're going to want to have on hand as well. So these sets can be farmed, or you can buy them off of guild traders. So the first set I want to talk about here, let me see if I can find it. Where are you? Where are you? Here it is, Morag Tongs. This is a medium armor set from Cyrodiil. When you deal direct damage, you cause the enemy to take 10% more poison damage. So this is very nice if you have a lot of stamina DPS. A lot of stamina DPS have at least a relatively high source of poison damage. So poison injection is common across all classes, but certain classes have more poison damage than the others. So for example, Nightblades don't really have any sort of poison damage, but Stamina Necromancers and Stamina Wardens both have pretty nice sources of poison damage, as do Stamina DKs. Morag Tong is pretty nice to have on hand if you have a lot of those stamina classes there that do have a lot of poison damage, with the Stamina Necromancer being the most powerful stamina DPS. In competitive groups, Morag Tong is seeing play on tanks. Then under the Telvar sets, so you can still buy these sets from guild traders. You're going to want to have on hand Powerful Assault, another medium armor set, so you get jewelry and weapons. When you cast an assault ability, you increase your weapon and spell damage and the weapon and spell damage of up to 3 allies within 10 meters by 164 for 15 seconds. This does stack with things like Major Courage, Minor Courage, and other sources of weapon and spell damage, and it is affected by weapon and spell damage modifiers. So you need to cast an assault ability, which as a tank, it's typically either going to be Caltrops or Vigor. So because this does stack with things like Major Courage and Minor Courage, it's actually a very powerful set to run. It does require a lot of sort of micromanaging, so that way you can apply the Powerful Assault buff to the correct people, so that way you're not giving it to the same people every single time. But if you are able to micromanage Powerful Assault correctly, it actually adds quite a bit of DPS to your group. A very advanced tanking set though, so if you're kind of just getting into tanking, I wouldn't necessarily farm for Powerful Assault, but keep it on your radar if you do end up being going into more endgame content. And then going over Monster Helms, there are quite a few Monster Helms that you're going to want to have on hand as a tank. Just going down the list here. The first one that you're going to want to have on tank, besides Lord Warden, obviously, Sworn Mother is actually quite nice to have on a Warden. So while Wardens do have Frozen Portal, which acts as a chain, it's relatively slow. So having Sworn Mother will definitely be a lot faster, and you won't be wasting stamina by using Silver Leash this way. So very niche usage, probably going to be using it kind of more in trash, maybe 4-man arenas like Dragonstar or Black Rose Prison, but it's not very useful obviously in boss fights because obviously it doesn't provide any sort of group utility. Next one is going to be Earthgore. It did get nerfed in Elsweyr, so it only heals one person rather than everybody within the area, but the good thing about Earthgore is that it'll always proc when you need it, so it'll only proc if you heal yourself or somebody who's under 50% health. So if you're over 50% health, this will never ever proc. Now, it only heals the lowest person health within the area, but typically speaking, you want that to be you. So instances where you're going to be running Earthgore and you want it to proc are instances where you are likely going to have the lowest amount of health. The classic example would be Cloud Rest as a tank. You're getting hit by Baneful Mark, and you can get it to proc on you, helping you to get rid of that Baneful Mark. So very, very niche ever since the changes in Elsweyr, but still useful in those niche scenarios. Moving on, you have Bloodspawn. This comes from Spindle Clutch 2. So this is just a raw ultimate generation set here. So whenever you take damage, you have a chance to generate ultimate. The additional resistances are nice, but you shouldn't rely on this set to get yourself up to the resistance cap. This is more for the ultimate generation to get more Warhorns out. Next we have Thurvokun. This comes from Fang Lair. This basically acts as an AoE minor maim. So on boss fights, not particularly useful because you will be running Heroic Slash, which already applies minor maim. But for trash pulls, this is nice to apply minor maim to everything around you. That way you don't have to run around and waste a lot of stamina Heroic Slashing everything in front of you. Very, very nice to have here, especially with 4-man arenas like Black Rose Prison and Dragonstar Arena. Then we have Vykosa. Very niche set here, but it is quite powerful in those particular fights where it's very useful. So when you bash an enemy, you've taunted, you frighten them with a deafening howl, applying major maim to them for 3 seconds, and this can occur every 15 seconds. This set comes from Moonhunter Keep here, so really nice if you know the fight and you can anticipate those high damage scenarios. So a good example of when to use Vykosa would be against the Dragon Breaths in Sunspire, and to kind of decrease the damage from the Defiling Blast from Lothus in Asylum Hard mode. So again, niche sets, but if you can anticipate the damage, it actually ends up being very strong. It's a very consistent source of major maim. And then finally, 2 more sets here. Both of these are from the Wrathstone DLC dungeons, so Stonekeeper from Frostvault and Symphony of Blades from Depths of Malatar. Stonekeeper is a more selfish set, so the one piece is pretty unique. It is basically a triglyph, but the 2-piece, when you block an attack, you gain an energy charge stack up to a stack per second. When you gain 6 charges, you get 5350 stamina and magicka and 5350 healing. That's the base amount. It's obviously adjusted here because I do have some points into CPs. After you release the charges, you cannot regain new ones for 14 seconds, so this basically has a 20-second cooldown. Again, selfish set here, just restores magicka, health, and stamina, so pretty nice to have if you're able to consistently proc it on that 20-second cooldown, but beyond that, doesn't provide any sort of group utility. And Symphony of Blades, on the other hand, is a very powerful group utility set here. So when you heal an ally who is under 50% of their primary resource, you grant them Meridius Favor, restoring 23-25 magicka or stamina, whichever is higher, for every second for 6 seconds. This can occur every 18 seconds. Now, it does not proc on you, it can only proc on somebody else, but you're typically going to be proccing this on a DPS. And this basically allows them to spec a little bit less into regen and a little bit more into just raw damage. If you have a lot of people running Symphony of Blades, a lot of support people running Symphony of Blades in Trials content, so you have 3 or 4 of these going off, it actually ends up providing a lot of additional sustain to your DPS. So definitely a set that you want to have on hand, especially as a Warden off tank, because you do have a lot of sources of kind of group healing. So that's pretty much it for all the sets that you're going to want to have on hand as a tank. Moving on to a character sheet. I am a Dark Elf. Race does not really play that big of a deal when it comes to the effectiveness of tanking. There are obviously better races for tanking. Those are going to be Nords, Imperials, Argonians, and Orcs. The Nords get 2000 max health and I believe 1000 max stamina, and they get some ultimate generation whenever they take damage. They also get 3960 spell and physical resistance, so you get a lot of tankiness when it comes to Nords, and you get some additional ulti gen to get higher Warhorn uptimes. Imperials get 2000 health and 2000 magicka. They get 3% cost reduction to all abilities, and they get 333 magicka, health, and stamina back whenever they deal damage. So Imperials get pretty much all raw stats, along with a little bit of additional sustain bonus there. Argonians get, I believe, 1000 health, 1000 magicka. They get 4000 magicka, health, and stamina back no matter what potion they drink. So if you're running a tri-stat potion and you are running an Argonian, you drink it and you pretty much get back half of your resources instantly. I should say magicka and stamina instantly. Really, really strong potion passive there. They also get, I believe, it is 7% additional healing done, so that helps out your self-heal, so it gives you a little bit more potent self-heals as well as some off-heals as well as a tank. And finally, orcs are kind of reserved more for the endgame tanks, where you're expected to do some DPS as well. Orcs get 2000 max stamina, 1000 max health, 258 additional weapon damage. They get some healing done whenever they deal damage, and they get some movement speed as well. So again, orcs are more there for tanks that want to do some off DPS on the side in those fights where an off tank might not necessarily be useful, where the damage might end up being more useful than a second tank. So kind of more for endgame players, but still pretty nice tanking class nonetheless, because you do get that stamina and that health. For our attributes, this is going to vary depending on your specific race and specific gear sets, but you do have a couple of rules that I like to kind of run by. So for me personally, I have 50 health, 10 stamina for magicka as a dark elf. General rule of thumb is you want to get around 35k max health, and then you want your stamina to be higher than your magicka. Those are the only two hard rules. 35k max health, and then higher stamina compared to magicka here. So you can see here that I do meet that requirement both on my front bar and on my back bar. Going over our Mundus, we're going the Atronach because we want them additional magicka regen. We are a vampire for the 10% additional magicka and stamina regen. When we hit stage 3, we also get the undeath passive, which gives us some additional damage mitigation when we're below 50% health. Pretty nice overall. Just be wary because you will take more damage from fire. You are a tank, so you have a lot of additional spell resistance, so it doesn't really matter all too much compared to something like a DPS or a healer where you don't have quite as much resistance, but it's still something to be mindful of in those trials where you're dealing with a lot of fire damage. Then we are running tri-stat food, so this is purple food, which gives us max health, max magicka, and max stamina. Next, our ability bars. Starting off with our front bar here, we have Pierce Armor, Heroic Slash, Polar Wind, Balance, Deceptive Predator for the minor evasion, and then we have Wild's Guardian for the additional magicka regen from Flourish. This Deceptive Predator is a flex spot, so you do have an option here in the front bar to kind of swap an ability out. For our back bar, we have Inner Rage, Overflowing Altar, Shimmering Shield, Blockade of Frost, and Bull Netch. And then our ultimate is Aggressive Warhorn. You have a lot of different flexible spots here. So Overflowing Altar, Shimmering Shield, and Blockade of Frost are all what I would consider flex spots here. Mainly because Blockade, you might have a bow on your back bar, so you can replace it with something like Endless Hail instead. Otherwise, Blockade, you're going to want to try to have that on hand on your staff back bar. Now, in terms of other abilities, so I mentioned that Deceptive Predator is a flex spot, but you will be running it for the minor evasion. That basically reduces the damage you take from area of effect attacks. It's actually quite useful to have in certain fights. So, for example, in Sunspire, this pretty much protects you against most of the boss's most damaging attacks, particularly the breath attacks. Under the green balance line, you can run really any three of these abilities, first three abilities here. So, Enchanted Growth, Budding Seeds, or Leeching Vines. These all help you proc maturation to give minor toughness off. I personally like Leeching Vines the most because it does apply minor lifesteal to enemies, so that allows me to basically heal everybody because minor lifesteal does count for proccing maturation. Then you can also run Enchanted Forest as a front bar ultimate too if you want to have that additional heal. You can also use Healing Thicket as well, depends on what you want, the additional heal over time or the 20 ultimate, so it basically cuts your ultimate cost down to effectively 70 ultimate. Under Winter's Embrace, we don't want to run balance. Balance is here for the magicka recovery as well as the major ward and major resolve, but if you don't want to give up that health for the magicka, you can also run something like Ice Fortress for major ward, major resolve. You also get minor protection while you have Ice Fortress up, which gives you some additional mitigation here. Gripping Shards is nice for hard CC because it does reduce movement speed and it also immobilizes enemies in the area for 3 seconds. Not quite as long or as strong as Choking Talons on the Dragon Knight, but still very useful to have. Shimmering Shield is going to only be useful if you have projectile. So this basically absorbs projectile, gives you magicka and major heroism. So really, really strong ultimate generation in fights where you have to, when you can use Shimmering Shield because of that major heroism uptime. Then we have Frozen Device, which is basically the Warden's version of Change. It basically throws down a portal on the ground. Any enemy that steps into the portal is automatically teleported to you, assuming that you're within that 28-meter range here. It also applies Major Maim to anybody that is teleported, so it will not apply to bosses because bosses will not be able to be teleported, but you can apply it to adds, and sometimes that's actually quite useful, particularly in format content, to help reduce the damage incoming to the group. Other abilities you want to have on hand here. Absorbing Magic is nice for the additional passive increase to your blocks, mitigation, but also helps with healing if you're dealing with spell projectiles. Destruction Staff line, Ellie Drain, you might want to run this, have this on hand in case your healers want to drop it entirely. And then obviously if you're running the bow back bar, have Endless Hail there. Running the Fighter's Guild line, Circle of Protection is nice to have for the minor protection for the group. I like to run the Ring of Preservation morph. Very niche uses, only for fights where you're going to be stacked up because it only has a 5-meter radius. Moving on, under the Sigil Order line, you can go with Deep Thoughts or Introspection if you don't want to run Balance for the additional sustain. It does require you to have the Sigil Order skill line though. So it does. Everybody will have access to the Mage's line, but not everybody will have access to the Sigil Order line. Finally, under Undaunted, all of these abilities here have your flex spots with the exception of Inner Rage, obviously. So, Overflowing Altar for the Vital Lifesteal, and as well as the Blood Feast synergy. Shadow Soak for the Black Widow synergy. It got nerfed in Elsweyr, but it's still quite strong. Bone Surge, one for the shield that you can give to other people, but also for the Major Vitality bonus for 6 seconds afterwards. The Energy Orb for the Combustion synergy to give back some additional resources to your friends. Under the Alliance line, any morph of Vigor for the self-heal as well as the group heal, and you will need to have this in order to proc Powerful Assault if you're running that set. And then you have Replenishing Barrier as a possible ultimate replacement because of the Magicka 8 passive, which gives you additional Magicka regen. Then you have Efficient Purge for that additional purging power if you do need it. Moving on to our champion points, CP cap has not changed for the past patch, so it's still 810, giving us 270 points across each for different constellations. Under the Lover, green CPs, 75 Arcanist, 49 Tenacity, and then we have 66 Shadow Ward, 40 Tumbling, and 40 Warlord. You can take some points out of Warlord and Tumbling to put them in a Shadow Ward if you'd like, or other CP nodes as you see fit. Under the blue CPs, the only 2 nodes that matter here are going to be Elfborn and Blessed. If you're running pure tank, as in you're not going to be using this tune for anything else, 100 Blessed, 100 Elfborn gives you 70 remaining points, which you can really distribute wherever you'd like. Definitely want to try to get 30 here for the perfect strike passive here, so I like to put everything in here. 26 precise strikes, 29 piercing, and 15 into mighty. And then our red CPs, this is a more generalist approach. It's very nice for most trials, but it will not maximize mitigation necessarily in any single trial. So we have 81 Ironclad, 61 Thick-Skinned, and 64 in both Hardy and Elemental Defender. That's pretty much it for all of the build information. So now let's go ahead and talk about the philosophy of tanking. So tanks in ESO kind of fit more into the support role, so you're less about being a damage sponge and more about supporting your allies. Supporting your allies basically means buffing them as well as debuffing the enemy. So a lot of that's going to come from your sets. So Alkosh, for example, is a very strong debuff set. Claw of Yolnahkriin is a very strong buff set because of that minor courage that it provides. But you can also buff and debuff through your abilities as well. So Heroic Slash gives you minor maim, which helps protect the group a little bit, reducing the damage that the boss is able to deal. Obviously, Warhorn for the major force buff is very, very powerful. It's a very nice group DPS buff, even in 4-man content, particularly in 12-man trials. But as a tank, you basically have 3 jobs you want to master. The first job that you want to master is obviously staying alive. If you're a dead tank, you're not a very useful tank. The second job, which is pretty much tied with the first job in terms of the order you want to master them, is learning to maintain Taunt on the boss. If you can't maintain Taunt, then you're obviously not a good tank either. Once you have mastered 1, maintaining Taunt, which also kind of involves learning mechanics, things like that, and then 2, staying alive, which again involves learning mechanics, then you can move on to step 3, which is buffing your allies and debuffing the enemy. So while you're first starting off as a tank, don't be afraid to play a little bit more selfishly to kind of get the sense of what you can survive, what you can't survive, learn the mechanics of the fight so you know what mechanics to avoid, what mechanics you can pretty much face tank, things like that. And that does help out to watch some videos of people tanking certain content that you want to run. So if you want to run, for example, Sunspire as a tank, it would be helpful to see if there are any streamers, either on YouTube or Twitch, that have tank POV videos of tanking Sunspire, whether that's the main tank or the off tank. And also be aware that there are going to be differences between a main tank and an off tank in a lot of different trials. While they basically have function under the same sort of role as a tank, the specific thing that you're going to be doing in each fight might be different. So a good example would be in Cloud Rest, main tank and off tank do very different things. So it's important to kind of know and learn how to do each of those roles, so that way you're able to flex in between a main tank role and an off tank role there. It's kind of difficult to explain how to use a support role without actually showing you guys. So do check out my streams archive channels. There are a few Warden tank POV videos. You might also want to check out Leofa on Twitch, who does sometimes do Warden tank POV videos as well. So that's pretty much it for this build video. Let me know if you guys have any questions about the build down in the comment section below. I will try to answer them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.